They announced I'd been cut out of my sister's will at her funeral. The sister I bathed, fed, and slept beside during her long illness. The sister who gripped my wrist during chemo and whispered, "Don't leave," while her husband sat in a padded pew 2 rows back, dry-eyed and untouched. They didn't even wait until after the service. Instead, they dropped it on me in a packed chapel, through a microphone, with her closed casket 6 feet in front of me, like it was just another item on the program. The officiant froze mid-sentence. He blinked, looked down at his notes, then said my name into the microphone. Lydia Hart. Not gently, not privately. Just my full name, crisp and formal, like I'd been called up for discipline in the middle of mourning. A man in a dark suit stood from the 2nd row with a leather folder held tight against his chest. "I'm sorry," he said, voice polished, "but I've been instructed to make a brief announcement on behalf of the estate." For one stupid heartbeat, I thought he meant donations or a scholarship, something that belonged in a room full of grief. Then he opened the folder and said, "There has been an updated will." Grant's hand squeezed his handkerchief. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at my sister. He looked at the room, like he was checking whether the audience was paying attention. The lawyer cleared his throat and said, "For clarity, this document supersedes all prior versions." Then he read the line that changed the oxygen. "Lydia Hart is not named as a beneficiary." The chapel didn't gasp. It did something worse. It went quiet. Thick, wet silence where you can hear people swallow. Then the whispers started anyway, because humans can't help themselves. "Wait, what?" I thought she was handling everything. Oh my God. I didn't stand. I didn't argue. My sister's casket was 6 feet in front of me, and I refused to become a spectacle beside her. But my stomach still dropped like the floor had quietly disappeared. The lawyer kept reading because that's what men like him do when they're paid to make cruelty sound like procedure. He read clauses about no standing and no claim and no reliance on verbal assurances. Then he hit the sentence that felt like a slap across my face. Any previous informal promises made to Lydia Hart are non-binding and irrelevant. Non-binding. Irrelevant. Like my sister's love was just background noise. I finally looked at Grant. He didn't look back. He stared at the casket with damp eyes and a grief mask so perfect it made me nauseous. And that's when the truth slid into place, ice cold. This wasn't a messy accident. He'd chosen this moment. He'd chosen my sister's funeral as the stage to erase me. If you've ever been blindsided in a place that was supposed to be sacred, hit like and subscribe. And drop a comment with where you're watching from, because I learned the hard way that this kind of betrayal is common. People just don't admit it until it happens to them. The officiant resumed the service like nothing had happened. The choir sang. The organ swelled. People dabbed their eyes. And I sat there, still, feeling like I'd been skinned alive in public. When the service ended, they formed a line for Grant. Hugs, condolences, murmurs about how strong he was. I watched a woman clasp Grant's hands and say, "Your wife was so lucky to have you." My teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. Lucky. Like he'd been the one lifting her into the bathtub when she couldn't stand. Like he'd been the one sleeping in a chair because she was scared of dying alone. But I didn't correct her, because Grant counted on the setting. He counted on grief to muzzle me. He counted on my restraint. He counted on the fact that a woman who raises her voice at a funeral gets painted as unstable forever. And for that day, it worked. I left the chapel without saying a word. At the reception hall after the burial, Grant made it worse. He stood beside a table of sandwiches and cookies like a man hosting a meeting, not mourning his wife. He put a hand on my shoulder for the first time all day and said loud enough for nearby relatives to hear, "Let's not do this here, Lydia." Marissa would have wanted peace. Peace. That word again. He said it like he was protecting her legacy, not protecting his theft. A few people nodded at him, like that settled it. Like my sister's wishes had been reduced to whatever made Grant look calm. Then he did the softest, nastiest thing. He leaned in and whispered, "You can stop embarrassing yourself. The will is done." He smiled when he said it, like he expected me to flinch. I didn't flinch. I just stared at him until his smile twitched. Later, my aunt pulled me aside with a tight mouth and said, "Honey, you don't want to fight a grieving man." A grieving man. I had to swallow a laugh that would have sounded like a breakdown. I said, "I'm not fighting grief. I'm fighting a document." She frowned like I'd missed the point. Grant started working the room. He hugged people. He thanked them for coming. And every time someone glanced toward me, he shook his head slightly, like a warning, like I was a problem to be managed. By the end of the reception, I felt the social shift. The same cousins who'd texted me prayers during chemo were suddenly avoiding me. I could see the thought in their eyes, maybe Lydia is being greedy. Maybe Lydia is making this about herself. That night, he sent a group email to the family. He wrote about boundaries and respecting Marissa's final wishes. He included the phrase unnecessary conflict driven by outside influence, like I was a virus my sister caught. I answered no one. I took screenshots. Diane told me, "Let him talk. Every message is a breadcrumb." 2 days later, I drove to Marissa's house to collect her photo albums and a few personal items she'd promised me. The front door wouldn't open. Grant had changed the locks. I stood on the porch staring at the deadbolt like it was a joke. Then Grant opened the door 2 inches and said, "You need to schedule visits through my attorney." He said it like I was a stranger trying to tour the place. I said, "Grant, my sister's things are in there." He replied, "They're mine now." Then he added, "Don't make me call the police. I don't want a scene." The word scene landed like a threat. He'd already made the scene. He just didn't want me to take one back. When I refused to leave, he did call. A patrol car arrived. The officer looked uncomfortable, like he'd been dragged into an argument he didn't understand. Grant handed him a paper and said, "She's trespassing. We have an updated will." The officer turned to me and said, "Apologetic, ma'am. Do you have proof you're allowed in the home?" Proof. Like 18 months of caregiving was something you printed out. I left without screaming. In my car, I shook so hard I couldn't start the engine for a minute. That lock change did something important. It stripped away my last instinct to give Grant the benefit of the doubt. People who are innocent don't barricade doors. People who are innocent don't need to isolate a house the moment a death happens. At home, I sat on my couch in the same black dress I'd worn for hospital visits that turned into vigils. I stared at my hands until the sun went down. They looked older than they had a week ago. My brain replayed the last 18 months like footage I couldn't shut off. Chemo appointments. Infusions that lasted hours. Nights my sister couldn't sleep, whispering my name like a lifeline. Times she gripped my wrist and said, "Please don't leave." Grant would show up at the beginning, bring flowers, kiss her forehead, and leave after 20 minutes with an excuse about work. When I challenged him, he'd sigh dramatically like I was being unreasonable. "Lydia, I can't live in a hospital," he'd say. "Somebody has to keep our life running. Our life." He said it like he owned it. Marissa used to squeeze my hand after he left and whisper, "He doesn't do well with sickness." And I'd nod because she was sick, and I wouldn't add weight to her pain. But in private, she told me other things. "I updated everything," she said one night, voice rough from medication. "I made sure you're taken care of." She said it like a decision, not a vague comfort. So when that lawyer called me, my mind couldn't reconcile it. Either Marissa had lied to me, or someone had lied about her. The next morning I called my cousin Ellen, the kind of person who remembered dates, receipts, and who said uncomfortable truths without blinking. "Ellen," I said, "did Marissa ever talk to you about her will?" There was a careful pause. "Yes," she said. "Why?" I told her what happened at the funeral. Ellen didn't gasp or swear. She just went quiet in a way that made my back straighten. "That's not right," she said finally. "Marissa showed me a copy last year. She was laughing about how formal it felt. You were in it." My throat tightened. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Ellen said. She told me, "If anything happens, Lydia will make sure Grant doesn't turn this into a circus. Grant doesn't turn this into a circus." I closed my eyes, because he'd already turned it into something worse. He'd turned her funeral into a weapon. "Tell my attorney that," I said. "You have an attorney?" Ellen asked. "I'm getting one today," I told her. I hired Diane Klein, a probate attorney who sounded like she'd been born with a spine made of steel. Her first questions weren't about my feelings, they were about process. Was the will filed with the court? Did anyone actually probate it? Was there a reading, or just an announcement? When I explained the funeral moment, Diane exhaled. "That's theater," she said. "And people do theater when they don't want scrutiny." That was the first real crack in Grant's perfect performance. Diane requested the document that had been read aloud and demanded the execution details. Grant's attorney sent a copy with a cover email dripping with politeness. He wrote that the document was final, clear, and reflective of the decedent's wishes. Then he added, "We trust you will advise your client not to pursue frivolous challenges during her time of mourning." Like grief was a leash. Diane called me after she reviewed it. "The signature looks labored," she said. "Not shaky. Labored. Like someone drawing letters instead of writing them. And the amendment date is during her final hospitalization." My hands went cold because that week wasn't just a hospital stay. That week was Marissa drifting in and out, confused, whispering about our childhood bedroom. I'd held ice chips to her lips because she couldn't lift a cup. She was not reviewing legal documents. She was barely in the room. Diane didn't say the word forgery yet. She didn't need to. She said, "I want the full medical records, especially that week. I want witness identities. I want notary logs, and I want to know who had access to Marissa when she couldn't advocate for herself." So I gave her names. Grant, obviously. The nurse agency Grant hired to help, and a woman named Sonia Pruitt. Sonia was the nurse who moved through Marissa's house like she belonged. She answered Marissa's phone with, "She's resting," like she had authority. She made coffee in Marissa's kitchen without asking. "The first time I questioned it," Grant said. "Don't start. Sonia is a professional." At the time I assumed it was just efficiency. Now, with that will in my hands, my stomach turned every time I pictured Sonia's calm smile. Diane pulled hospital records. They showed sedation, cognitive impairment notes, documented confusion. She pulled pharmacy logs too because Diane didn't miss angles. Then she hired a handwriting expert. I brought a folder of signatures from years back, birthday cards, old receipts, Marissa's driver's license renewal. The expert studied them, then the will. "This was traced," he said simply. No drama. No maybe. Traced. I asked, even though I already knew, could she have signed like that if she was weak? He shook his head. "A weak signature is shaky but instinctive. This is slow, deliberate. Someone drawing a signature they don't own." Something ugly rose in my chest, not grief anymore. Rage. Diane filed a formal challenge in probate court. Grant responded by calling me a disgruntled sibling motivated by jealousy and financial desire. Jealous. Of what? My sister's cancer? Her death? The funeral he used as a stage? Diane said calmly, "They're going to try to paint you as unstable. Let them." Then we got the emails. Diane subpoenaed communications between Grant and the estate attorney. What came back made my skin crawl. Weeks before Marissa died, Grant wrote, "Need to finalize quickly. She's declining. Want to avoid complications." Complications. Like I was a complication, not a sister. Another email, "Prefer Lydia not be involved. She's emotional and will complicate things." Another, "Can we do this at home? I can arrange witnesses." I read that line 3 times. I can arrange witnesses. That wasn't grief. That was logistics. It was a man scheduling theft. At the time, I thought the funeral announcement was the worst thing he could do to me. I was wrong. Because now I could see the whole structure he'd built. He hadn't stumbled into fraud. He'd engineered it around the weeks my sister couldn't protect herself. Diane asked me to write a timeline. Dates, times, who was present. Facts only. So I wrote about the day I arrived and found Sonia at Marissa's kitchen table with Marissa's laptop open. Sonia smiled and said, "I was just checking her medication portal." Why was a home nurse in a portal? Diane brought in an IT consultant named Marco who looked like he'd rather be fixing servers than stepping into family grief. He didn't care about Grant's charm. He cared about logs. He requested access to Marissa's email account backup and her patient portal activity history through legal channels. 2 hours into his review, Marco looked up and said, "Someone set forwarding rules." He showed us a screen full of timestamps, alerts about account activity, password resets, notifications from the nurse agency. All of them quietly forwarded to an address I didn't recognize. The address wasn't Grant's main email. Of course it wasn't. It was a secondary account with a bland name, created months earlier. When Diane subpoenaed the provider, the recovery phone number tied back to Grant's work line. Marco also found something that made my stomach clench. During Marissa's final week, someone had attempted multiple password resets on her banking account from an IP address tied to the nurse agency's office. Not Marissa's home, not the hospital. The agency. Diane turned that into another filing. Unauthorized access during incapacity, she said. That's a big deal. She started talking about protective services and vulnerable adult statutes, and for the first time I realized Grant wasn't just going to lose money. He was going to lose freedom. Grant tried to outrun the investigation with public image. He organized a celebration of life event at the church 3 weeks after the funeral, complete with a slideshow and a donation jar for a cancer charity. People loved him for it. That was the point. He stood at the podium and said, voice trembling on cue, Marissa wanted love, not conflict. She wanted unity, not drama. Then he looked directly at me in the third row and added, she didn't want anyone turning her passing into a dispute over possessions. The room shifted toward me again, like it had at the funeral. A few heads shook, disappointed, like I'd already done something wrong. Grant was building a story where I was the greedy sister and he was the noble widower protecting Marissa's peace. After the service, a woman from church approached me and said, "Sweetheart, sometimes it's best to let go." Let go. Of what? Of a forged signature? Of theft? I smiled politely and said, I'm letting go of him, not of the truth. That night, Diane emailed me a single sentence, let him keep talking. We're going to use his own mouth as evidence. Within days, investigators requested the church's donation accounting because Grant had insisted on handling it. The finance committee chair, embarrassed and angry, provided records that showed something clean and sharp. Grant had written checks to the nurse agency using donation funds as temporary cover, then reimbursed later from Marissa's account. He'd used dead wife's sympathy money as a bridge loan for fraud. When the detective told Diane that, her voice went icy. That moves him from opportunist to predator, she said. Juries hate predators. Marco also recovered a deleted draft document from Grant's laptop backup through Discovery. It wasn't the final amendment, but it had tracked changes and comments. One comment, highlighted in yellow, read, "Remove Lydia completely, no partial, no reimbursement," like my existence was a line item to erase. When I saw that comment, something settled in me. A calm I hadn't had since Marissa got sick, because it confirmed what my gut already knew. Grant hadn't done this out of confusion. He'd done it out of contempt. I wrote about a day Marissa asked me, confused, did we sign something yesterday? I laughed gently and told her no. I wrote about the way Sonia hovered with a clipboard, always there when Grant wasn't, always the calm voice in the room. And I started seeing a pattern. Diane did what smart attorneys do. She followed the money. She subpoenaed the nurse agency's payment records. Grant had paid them in 2 large lump sums, and those lump sums came from Marissa's separate savings account, not their joint account. The account Marissa kept for her own security. I said, how did he access that? Diane's voice went flat. He didn't. Not legally, which means we're not just looking at a forged will. We're looking at theft from a vulnerable adult. That sentence changed the stakes again. This wasn't a family argument. This was crime. We deposed Sonia Pruitt. She showed up in pearls and a neat blouse, smiling like she was about to reassure a patient. She spoke softly, controlled. I understand this is hard, she told me, but Marissa was very clear about her wishes. Diane didn't react. She just asked questions like a blade. Were you present during the execution of the amendment? Diane asked. Yes, Sonia said. Where? At the residence. Who requested it? Sonia's eyes flicked. Grant coordinated. Was Marissa alert? She was tired but aware, Sonia said quickly. Diane slid the hospital record across the table, the one noting sedation and cognitive impairment. Sonia blinked, smile tightening. She had moments of clarity, she said. Diane repeated it slowly. So you're saying you, a nurse, made the legal determination that she was competent to amend a will? Sonia's smile hardened. I'm saying she knew what she wanted. Diane leaned in. And what she wanted was to exclude the sister who cared for her daily. Sonia's eyes sharpened. She wanted peace, Sonia said. Less conflict, less conflict. The same phrase Grant used when he pushed me out. Diane asked Sonia if she'd ever been a witness on legal documents for patients under her care. Sonia hesitated, then said, sometimes. Diane produced a list. Sonia's name appeared as a witness on multiple documents over the last year for different clients, different families. Same nurse, same role. My throat tightened. This wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. Diane ended the deposition politely, then told me in the hallway, she's lying. And she's sloppy. How do you know? I asked. Diane said, because she thinks she's smarter than paper. And paper always wins. Probate court arrived like a storm. Grant walked in wearing the grief mask again, thin and perfect. Hollis Crane sat beside him. Sonia sat behind them like she belonged. People in the courtroom glanced at me like they were trying to decide who to blame. I kept my shoulders back and my voice calm. Diane presented the receipts, medical records, handwriting analysis, witness patterns, Grant's emails arranging witnesses, and the funding trail from Marissa's separate account. The judge, a woman with silver hair and an expression that didn't soften, listened without blinking. Then she called Grant to testify. Grant swore an oath like it meant something. He said Marissa was lucid enough. The judge asked how often he was present during the hospitalization window. Grant said, as often as I could be. The judge asked, define that. Grant's jaw worked. Every few days, he said. The judge looked down at the visitor log. My name appeared every day. Grant's name appeared twice. Twice. She looked up and said, so you were present 2 times during the week you claim she was lucid enough to amend her will. Grant blinked. Yes, he said, trying to hold confidence. The judge asked why he coordinated the notary and witnesses without Marissa's sister present. Grant tried to answer with soft words about privacy. Then she asked the question that exposed him in a way no accusation could. Why did you announce this at the funeral? Grant swallowed. I wanted clarity, he said, so there wouldn't be misunderstandings. Clarity, while my sister's body was still warm. The judge stared at him for a long beat, then ordered an immediate estate freeze. She set the amendment aside and referred the matter to the district attorney. The room shifted, whispered, turned to look at Grant like he'd changed species. Outside the courtroom, a local reporter approached. Do you have a statement? She asked me. I shook my head. Diane stepped in. We trust the process, she said. And we trust the truth. Grant's face tightened as he walked past, and for the first time I saw real emotion. Not grief. Fear. Because now it wasn't a family dispute he could bully into silence. It was a criminal investigation. And once the state is involved, you don't get to control the narrative anymore. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Detectives pulled notary logs, interviewed the notary Caleb Voss, and traced deposits. Caleb tried to play dumb until they put a bank transfer in front of him. $2,000 deposited the day after the notarization from a shell account linked to Grant. Caleb asked for a lawyer. Sonia was next. The nursing board was notified. They subpoenaed her records and found unauthorized access to Marissa's patient portal. They found her name as a witness on multiple documents for vulnerable clients. They found gifts routed through family members that looked exactly like bribes. Grant's social circle began collapsing before anyone ever said the word prison. Friends stopped returning calls. His church asked him to step down from the finance committee. The irony of that made me laugh once, quietly, alone in my car. He'd always loved controlling money. Money had turned on him. Then Grant tried to buy silence. Holly's Crane offered a private settlement. Money for me if I withdrew challenges. A confidentiality clause. A gentle little agreement like he could still purchase the story. Diane didn't even blink. It's criminal now, she said. He can't settle his way out of handcuffs. Grant responded by filing for a restraining order against me. Against me. He claimed I was harassing him, causing distress, threatening his peace. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Grant sat across from me with a wounded expression, voice soft. I'm just trying to grieve, he told the judge. She won't let me. Diane stood and submitted the probate freeze order, the handwriting analysis, the DA's notice of investigation. Then she played a voicemail Grant had left me after probate court. His voice was low and controlled. Take the money, he said. Stop. You're not as loved as you think you are. The judge's eyes lifted from the paper to Grant's face. She denied the restraining order and said, loud enough for the clerk to type it cleanly, this court will not be used to intimidate a witness in an ongoing investigation. Witness. That word changed how the room held me. Grant's next move was uglier. He called my daughter. My 16-year-old. He left a voicemail about family and forgiveness and how I was obsessed with money. My daughter played it for me with a look I'll never forget. Not teenage annoyance, protective anger. Mom, she said, he's sick. That night, I went through Marissa's old phone backup. I wasn't hunting. I was trying to breathe. Then I searched Grant's name, and I found a text thread from 3 months before her death. Marissa wrote, "Stop pushing me. I'm not changing it." Grant replied, "If you don't fix this, I'll fix it for you." My throat closed. That wasn't a metaphor. That was intent. Diane submitted it to the DA immediately. After that, the plea deal offers changed tone. They stopped pretending Grant was a confused widower. They started asking how much time he'd be willing to accept. The nursing agency owner also came forward, because pressure makes people talk. She admitted Grant had requested Sonia specifically and asked whether Sonia could handle paperwork. She tried to soften it with nervous laughter. Diane didn't laugh. She asked, "What did he mean by paperwork?" The owner didn't answer. Then the police got a warrant for Grant's work laptop. They found drafts of a will amendment in his email attachments. Drafts. Edits. Notes. He had written in the margin, "Remove Lydia completely." He'd also searched how to change beneficiary without spouse knowing, like it was a hobby. Grant was arrested at his office, not quietly, not discreetly, in front of employees. The detective told me later Grant had tried to act offended. "I'm a respected man," Grant said. The detective replied, "Respected men don't forge signatures on deathbeds." The line spread through town like a headline. The case became local news. Not national, but enough to hurt. The funeral clips surfaced too. Somebody had recorded the start of the service on their phone, thinking they were capturing something heartfelt. Instead, they captured my erasure. The audio wasn't perfect, but you could hear the lawyer say my name. You could hear the silence. That clip mattered more than people think. Because fraud is abstract until you see the cruelty of it. You see a man choosing a funeral as a stage. You see a room full of mourners turned into an audience for humiliation. You see deliberate intent in real time. If you're still listening, hit like again. And if you've ever had someone try to erase you with paperwork, drop a comment, because I want to know I'm not the only person who sat in a sacred room and realized the betrayal was planned. If you're still listening, this is the point where most people would say, "I thought that was the worst. I did. I really did. But I was wrong." Because then Grant tried to blame Marissa herself. He claimed she'd been paranoid, confused, up and down, he told investigators, not always there. He was trying to weaponize her illness to justify his forgery. And that's when Diane asked for something I hadn't thought to request: the hospice notes, the social worker notes, the private conversations documented in healthcare records that show what a patient believed and feared. Those notes revealed Marissa had told a social worker she was afraid Grant would take everything and push Lydia out. She'd asked for resources about protecting separate assets. She'd asked about updating beneficiaries. She'd been lucid enough to plan protection. Grant's story about her confusion started collapsing under professional documentation. The probate side moved too. The original will was located in the estate attorney's vault, dated a year earlier, properly executed, properly witnessed. It named me co-executor alongside a trust attorney. It left me a portion of Marissa's separate assets and specifically referenced reimbursement for caregiving expenses I'd paid out of pocket. It also included a letter. Not legally binding, but emotionally devastating. "If you're reading this, I'm gone," Marissa wrote. "Grant will try something. He'll try to make you feel small. Don't let him. You were the only person who stayed." I cried then, at my kitchen table, because she'd known. Grant's lawyer requested a family resolution meeting at his office downtown. Hollis Crane framed it as compassion. "Everyone's exhausted," he said. "Let's find a peaceful path, peace again. Always peace when they mean surrender." I went because Diane told me to. Not to negotiate. To listen. To document. The conference room smelled like coffee and expensive cologne. Grant sat at the head of the table with a folder already prepared, like he was hosting a business deal instead of discussing my dead sister. He opened with a sigh and said, "Lydia, I don't want this to get uglier." Then he slid a paper toward me. It offered money. Not a share of the estate, not what Marissa actually intended, just a lump sum labeled goodwill. In exchange, I had to sign a confidentiality agreement and withdraw all challenges. Diane didn't touch the paper. She asked, "Why does your goodwill require silence?" Grant's smile twitched. "Because Lydia is stirring people up," he said. "She's making it sound criminal." Diane nodded slowly. "That's interesting," she said. "Because the state is already looking at it as criminal." Grant's voice sharpened for the first time. "You don't have to destroy my life," he said to me, like I was being dramatic. I looked at him and said quietly, "You destroyed your life when you chose her funeral to do this." His eyes flashed, and then he forced his face calm again. Hollis Crane tried to pivot. "Marissa wasn't always of sound mind near the end," he said, testing the line. Diane leaned back. "If you're suggesting incapacity," she replied, "then your amendment is worthless, and your access to her accounts becomes exploitation. Pick a lane." Grant didn't pick a lane. He picked a threat. He leaned in and said, "Lo, you don't want what happens when people think you're after money. They'll stop respecting you." I watched his mouth form the word respecting, and realized that was his true currency. Not dollars. Reputation. Control. Diane ended the meeting. In the elevator, she said, "He just intimidated you on record in front of his counsel." "Does that matter?" I asked. Diane smiled without warmth. "It matters a lot." A week later, Adult Protective Services contacted me. They'd received a report claiming I had undue influence over Marissa and had been pressuring her about inheritance. Grant had filed it. He was trying to flip predator into victim and make me the suspect. The APS investigator, a woman named Renee, met me at a coffee shop. She expected hysteria. She got receipts. I handed her Marissa's caregiving calendar, my expense spreadsheet, the visitor logs, and Grant's email saying he wanted me excluded because I was emotional. Renee's eyebrows lifted higher with every page. Renee said, "It looks like you were the primary caregiver." I said I was. She said, "And it looks like someone tried to isolate her from you." I didn't even have to say his name. She wrote it anyway. 2 days after that, Renee visited Grant. He tried to charm her. He offered tea. He said he was grieving. Renee later told the detective he performed. It didn't match the data. That report became another brick in the wall closing around him. The criminal case took months. Depositions, motions, evidence sorting. Grant's defense tried to suppress the texts. They tried to claim privacy. They tried to say the funeral announcement wasn't relevant. The judge disagreed. "It demonstrates intent and pattern," she said. Grant lost that motion. Sonia tried to cooperate to reduce her own exposure. She offered a statement. She said Grant pressured her. She said he told her Marissa wanted it. She said she believed him. The prosecutor asked her, "Did you get paid?" Sonia admitted she'd received gifts. The prosecutor asked, "How much?" Sonia stopped talking. Caleb Voss pled out early. He surrendered his notary commission and testified that Grant had called him, offered extra cash, and said the nurse would handle the patient's signature because the patient was too tired to sign properly. Caleb said Grant told him, "Just notarize what you see." That testimony mattered because it showed knowledge. Grant knew Marissa couldn't sign properly. He knew the signature was being handled, and he still proceeded. He wasn't a confused husband. He was the architect. The trial began nearly a year after the funeral. Grant sat at the defense table looking thinner, older, his grief mask now replaced by something more hollow. The prosecutor laid it out with ruthless clarity: motive, opportunity, arranged witnesses, shell payments, unauthorized account access, intimidation attempts, and the funeral stunt. They played the funeral clip for the jury. Watching it in a courtroom felt different than living it. It was like seeing my own humiliation from above. You could hear the lawyer say, "Lydia Hart is not named as a beneficiary." You could hear the tiny sounds of people reacting. You could feel the cruelty without needing to explain it. Grant testified. He tried to sound gentle. He said he was overwhelmed, trying to simplify, trying to avoid conflict. The prosecutor asked, "If you wanted to avoid conflict, why did you announce it at the funeral?" Grant blinked and said, "I wanted clarity." The prosecutor asked, "Clarity for who?" Grant didn't answer. Then the prosecutor displayed Marissa's text. "Stop pushing me. I'm not changing it." Grant's reply, "If you don't fix this, I'll fix it for you." The prosecutor asked, "What did you mean by fix it?" Grant said, "It was an expression." The prosecutor asked, "Was the forged signature an expression too?" Grant's jaw tightened. For the first time he looked angry, and that anger told the jury more than his words did, because grief doesn't flare like that. Entitlement does. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. The jury convicted Grant on multiple counts: forgery, fraud, identity misuse, theft from a vulnerable adult, and attempted witness intimidation. When the foreperson said guilty, Grant's shoulders dropped like the string holding him up had finally snapped. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. The judge didn't perform. She read the impact statements, reviewed the evidence, and then looked directly at Grant. "You attempted to rewrite a dying woman's intent," she said. "You used her illness as cover. You used her funeral as a weapon. You stole dignity as much as money." Then she sentenced him to prison. Not probation. Not a slap. Prison. The room exhaled like it had been holding its breath for a year. Grant didn't look at me when the deputy guided him away. He stared straight ahead like a man trying not to see what he'd become. After sentencing, people asked me if I felt satisfied. They wanted a speech. They wanted a movie ending. But the truth is, the justice didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like paperwork, stamped and filed, finally catching up to a man who thought he could stage manage reality. The estate was restored under the original will. Grant lost his claim to Marissa's separate assets. The court ordered restitution for the funds he'd drained from her account to pay the nurse agency. Sonia's license was revoked permanently. Caleb received a reduced sentence in community service, plus fines that wiped out his little luxury life. Some people told me I should forgive for my own peace. I didn't argue. I just didn't do it. Forgiveness wasn't the assignment. Truth was. Protection was. Finality was. I visited Marissa's grave once after everything ended. No flowers. She always hated flowers because she said they looked pretty while dying. I brought her letter in my coat pocket and sat on the grass. I read it again and whispered, "He tried, but he didn't win." Then I stood and left. No dramatic closing. No reunion. No soft lesson. Just forward motion, clean and irreversible. My name is Lydia Hart, and this is what happened when I was pushed beyond restraint. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this story.